Hey guys, Nicole here from Writersbrooke. For this week's video, I'm going to be reviewing the TV show Legacies. If you're new to our channel, Writersbrooke does writing tips on our blog and reviews here on our YouTube channel for all things movies, music, TV, books, video games, and more. Make sure to like, subscribe, and ring that bell so that you can stay up to date with all of Writersbrooke's content. Now that Legacy's mid-season return is well underway, I thought it would be a good time to review the show so far. They've got 10 episodes under their belt, which is quite enough time to develop world, conflict, and character. For all those new to the TVD universe, Legacies is a spin-off of the originals, which is itself a spin-off of the Vampire Diaries. To be honest, I was never a big fan of the early seasons of the Vampire Diaries. I had a hard time getting behind a driving plot point of two brothers being in love with the same girl, vampires or not. I ended up skipping past the first 5 seasons where that was the main plot, and during an off-season run of the originals, I watched the last few seasons of the show, which I did enjoy much of. The originals, however, was one of my favorite shows. It had all of the reasons I wanted to like the Vampire Diaries, like witches, vampires, and werewolves, not to mention flashbacks to different time periods, and it times them by 10. They took the original vampire villains from the Vampire Diaries, made them the main characters, changed the setting to New Orleans instead of Mystic Falls, and made the main plot point different magical factions fighting to dominate the city, while keeping their own families safe. Plus, the main characters aren't high school or college age. Legacies isn't just a spin-off of the originals, though. It's a spin-off of both shows, which I think is smart because it capitalizes on the success of 2 different series, meaning the possibility of attracting different fan bases. The show centers around a school for magical beings, which was opened by Alaric Saltzman and Caroline Forbes at the end of the Vampire Diaries to protect his Gemini witch twin daughters, Lizzie and Josie. Another student at the school is Hope Michelson, the tri-bred daughter of vampire Klaus Michelson and werewolf Haley Marshall, not to mention the granddaughter of one of the most powerful witches of all time. Hope began attending the Salvatore School for the Young and the Gifted at the end of season 4 of the originals. So the shift into this new show seemed pretty natural. I was simultaneously excited for a continuation of Hope's story and terrified that it would be awful. The trailers seemed pretty cheesy, and I knew that this show was either going to be horrible or great, and I wasn't sure which. So far, it's safe to say that I've loved it. The setting of the school is in Mystic Falls, in a Salvatore boarding house seen throughout the Vampire Diaries. It takes recognizable sets and shifts them into a school campus, so that even though this place is new to audiences, it still feels like home to fans. The main conflict of the show is generally set up as a monster of the week kind of thing. Every episode is about a new monster who's attacking the school. It avoids the it's been done before plot arc, however, through its reasoning behind it. These monsters are all searching for a mystical dagger kept at the school's library, whose powers and history are completely unknown. Why are these monsters attacking, and what do they want with the dagger? It invokes a mystery as one of the main threads of the plot, while leaving the world open to expansion. Although the TVD universe has werewolves, vampires, and witches throughout it, it doesn't normally expand further with magical creatures. This series is experimenting with an expansion into folklore and mythology, which I really appreciate. Each monster has an established root in those kinds of stories, so for those who are into that kind of thing, it's fun to piece together clues to figure out which monster is coming after them. At the same time, Legacy's adaptations of these creatures breathes new life into the folklore and myth and brings a quality to them that's lively, whimsical, and fun, even when it's a little bit scary. At the same time, it's a show about a school for magic-wielding teenagers. Unlike a lot of shows that fall into this category, Legacies is very aware of the cheesiness of that statement and plays it up. Normally, the TVD universe takes itself very seriously, but Legacies can see the humor in it and makes fun of itself quite often, making references to Harry Potter, Avengers, and other fantasy shows. It's also a teenage drama where actual teenagers play the lead roles, which is refreshing. The cast is also fantastic. Alaric, played by Matthew Davis, was one of the main characters, the teacher, in the Vampire Diaries, and he's definitely one of my favorite characters from the show. He's an approachable headmaster who's honestly just trying to do his best to help lead these powerful children in a positive direction that won't get them or anybody else killed. The fact that he also has 2 children who attend the school invites a fun dynamic between the students, the kids, and Hope. Hope, played by Danielle Rose Russell, brings all the Michelson lore from the originals with her. She's a troubled teen who's lost a lot already. She's quite a bit like her stubborn, protective, and loner father, but just as much like her loyal, caring, and equally stubborn mother. She brings these qualities that the audience loved from the originals and puts her own fun spin on it as well. Lizzie and Josie, played by Jenny Boyd and Kaylee Bryant, respectively, bring life to the teenage versions of the Saltzman twins. Lizzie is all passion and the pursuance of perfection, even though she definitely has a lot to work on, like witch temper tantrums that almost end up in accidentally stabbing people on the forehead. Josie is the exact opposite. She is loyal, sensitive, and selfless, so much so that she often gets overlooked. They make a fun duo that plays well with and against Hope. Landon Kirby, played by Aria Shagasemi, is the main love interest of the series, who's not your typical TVD heartthrob, which makes me love him all the more. Initially, when I found out that the love interest they had introduced in the end of the originals for Hope was not going to be in the series, I was pretty disappointed. But any disappointment I felt was quickly forgotten by the end of the pilot episode. Landon is a smart and shy foster kid. The definition of that character would make it seem easy to slip into a stereotypical bad boy love interest, but Arya strays far from that, making Landon relatable, real, and entirely unaware that he's supposed to be the heartthrob of this show. He's witty, sarcastic, and openly aware of his flaws, and the fact that he's actually working to fix them. Raphael Waith, played by Peyton Alex Smith, is Landon's foster brother and a werewolf. He takes the typical angry werewolf kid persona and adds depth to him, making him a loyal brother who is willing to do whatever it takes to defend Landon and avoids the bad boy persona by actively dodging romantic attempts by Lizzie, who is interested in the new handsome loner werewolf, all because he doesn't want to get caught up in anything like that. Milton M.G. Greasley, played by Quincy Faust, is a well-mannered, smart, and nerdy vampire student aide of Alaric's. He is Josie's best friend, and he's totally in love with Lizzie. He wants to be the best he can be, but he's actually also completely terrified of everything, which means that when he does stand up to fight for what he wants, it means all the more. Quincy brings a likable and fun-loving flair to the character, which makes him a joy to watch. There are so many great characters that analyzing all of them would take far too long to fit into this video, so you'll just have to watch the show to find out more about them. All the characters have strengths and real weaknesses that they are fighting to work through, some of which are tied to their magic, but others aren't. I was really surprised by how complex and relatable the characters are. I wasn't expecting that from a show like this, but I love seeing it. Legacies takes an interesting stance on the idea of good versus evil. It's about a bunch of kids who have the ability to cause a lot of harm in the world, but are striving every day to be good. They're trying to find confidence in themselves, fight through their fears, both magical and not, and learn how to control their abilities so that they can do more good with them and avoid hurting anyone. Most of them come from complicated families who are often depicted as villains. The idea that heroes and villains aren't as clean-cut opposites as everyone says is woven pretty deeply into the story. The TVD universe usually has every episode open with a character's inner monologue that represents their words as they journal in their diary. It's all about their story. So Legacies is taking that idea and using it to explain that every story is different depending on who's telling it. Yeah, maybe Klaus Michelson was a villain in the eyes of the main cast of the Vampire Diaries, but he's also a hero in the eyes of his daughter. Even the very vampires that the school's dedicated to were villains to some people. We're all just people doing our best to navigate this crazy world in our own way. Any of us have the ability to do good and bad, and we're definitely going to stumble along the way as we make our choices and tell our own stories. So overall, Legacies is less hypersexualized than the Vampire Diaries, is less violent than the originals, and it introduces its own kind of magic into the TVD universe with a flair of fun, goofy, and a little bit scary. The Vampire Diaries was mostly about romance, whereas the originals was more about fighting for your family. Legacies is about finding yourself and protecting the ones you love along the way. It meets both shows in the middle, taking what was great about them and then building on it. I would definitely recommend watching Legacies. I found myself looking forward to watching each new episode, and hopefully as the show continues its run, it will only get better. Legacies has a lot of promise, and if the first 10 episodes are any indication, I'm excited to see where they go with it.